what are the key issues? What are the burning facts, the discussions that we should be having? What can we draw from the content that we've heard from our sessions and from the breakout panel discussions? Well, we've got a panel now of insightful thought leaders from across our sector. I'm delighted that we've got Mark Wright from Simply Communicate, who has a deep history with our sector, with our industry. Charlotte Kensett, who is the head of corporate comms with Nationwide, someone who's been a great friend and partner for our sector, for the association. And we have Richard Waddington from the Events Marketing Association, a key player within our sector. And I'm delighted that chairing today's afternoon session discussion is Angela Law from Everysense. God, I nearly forgot there. Sorry. It's been a long day. It's been a long day. So I'll hand over now for Angela to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marco. Because you've been out and doing different sessions and going to different groups, I thought first of all we'd do a public service by just bringing everybody up to speed with some of the key ideas that have come out from the different sessions. So perhaps, Charlotte, if I ask you first of all for any thoughts that came out of the couple of sessions you've just been to.
Yes, most definitely. I was at the technology sessions, and the first session was around intelligent indoor positioning systems, which is obviously a mouthful. In essence, it's the ability to track and understand delegate behaviours, where they are when they're in a conference, how they behave, where they go, and you are able to send them messaging constantly about what it is that you want them to do next. A really interesting idea, an idea that feels like it's the next iteration of where we are going naturally, if a little bit scary. The question about privacy most definitely comes up, and how do you opt out? How do you go to the toilet without anybody knowing that you're in the toilet, etc., etc. So those kind of conversations are quite interesting. It doesn't feel like it's a million miles away to me, most definitely, and it does feel like it's something that people could get real value from, both from a venue perspective, around the venues understanding where the footfall lies, where people naturally go to, as well as from a conference planner around how best to get message to delegate. So that was the first one. That was very interesting. The second one was around trends and about content trends. And that was quite varied. That was talking a lot about the things that are up and coming, so vlogging being video blogging, social films being the narrative being made up by the users, and how interactive those kind of opportunities are. And something that was really nice, and I have no real understanding of why this is good, but 360 films, so the ability to watch a film and choose which bit of the film that you're looking at, or move with the film, is a really interesting idea, just because it was so incredibly fun. I'm not sure what the worth is at the moment, but it's definitely something that you should be looking at.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Richard, what did you get out of the sessions you've just been to?
Okay, so I followed, as instructed, Stream 2. Was it Stream 2? Yeah. No, Conference Room 2. So Will gave us a talk on basically making good planners great. And that was an interesting discussion around sort of the personal development, personal understanding for the planners. And, you know, I think sort of 10, 15 years ago, it used to be about name badges and stuff in goodie bags and everything else. And now this whole thing, which I think a lot of the conversation today has been around, of, you know, event strategy and objectives and outcomes and measurement, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I think there's this whole shift, and it's a passion of mine from, you know, moving from event managers to event marketeers. But of course, you have to know the logistics of how to put an event on and why you're putting it on to understand the marketing objectives. But I just think there is a big thing about taking people from being good people to great people to being exceptional people. You know, if you want to compete in the industry and in the marketplace, either as an agency or as an individual, you have to go that one step further. You can't just do the job. So that was very interesting. We did talk about professionalisation, which I'd like to talk about more in this discussion. And the second one then was by Will Glending, which was very much about, okay, the process of doing it and the structure of putting on the big events that he's been involved with, and how to structure your team and your organisation. And, you know, whilst things can be collaborative, things had to be led. So there had to be leader, there had to be organisation, there had to be structure to your team. If you don't get that right, you're going to be in the doodah.
Okay, that sounds great. I was in the session listening to Mark, so it's probably better if I suggest what my takes out of that were. And before that, I went to a session by CTN where they were talking about a couple of recent projects. And the thing that absolutely struck me in the conversations that they had was their openness to working collaboratively with the client under whatever circumstances the client had. So therefore being very open to the ideas that the client brought to the table, being very open to working with the client's other suppliers, and being incredibly open therefore to working with the people who might be engaged with, in other ways, sharing the messages. And I just thought that that was a particularly inspiring and useful way of thinking about it, which then meant that they had got some fantastic outcomes because of the openness of that approach, which actually fitted in very well with what Mark was talking about, because in effect, Mark was positioning us, as he always does, in the context of how the technology is driving change and how that's making everything utterly different, which we know, fantastically disruptive environment to clients, so therefore that has to be disruptive to agencies. And I think the thing that Mark said, which kind of really stood out to me, was that he showed a video by Lady Gaga, of course, why wouldn't you? And he danced a little. And then he said the issue there was that project was all to do with starting the conversation. So he was positioning it, I think, in saying, in a new collaborative world, which is where we're at now, both from an agency and a client point of view, it's to do with starting the conversation, which led me to have another thought, and that is that up to now, both clients and I think particularly agencies have in many good ways been control freaks. Agencies largely are employed to be control freaks, and that's been a great skill and extremely welcome. But I'm not sure anymore, based on what clients want and what consumers want and what clients want, that just being control freaks and saying, we have the ideas, we are the owners, we're going to do this to you, is going to cut it anymore. And so for me, the burning issue to talk to you guys with and to get your questions is actually how are EVCOM members now going to evolve in order to meet that challenge? Because when I go out and talk to different EVCOM members and agencies, I see a lot of people who are still doing things the way they did maybe 10 years or even 5 years ago. And I think things are moving much more quickly than that. So Charlotte, from your point of view, from the point of view of being client side and wanting to engage employees, what's changing for you on that collaborative theme in terms of the expectations people have?
Yeah, it's a massive question. The expectations that there is a natural will to revert to what you know. And when we heard this morning from Pauline about the opportunity to broaden your thinking and open your mind, it isn't just as easy as saying, from now on, I'm going to do this. And therefore, moving away from what you believe you know and allowing new influences to take you in a different direction, whether that be about the people that you're introducing into your working experiences, whether that be through employees or through suppliers, is quite a brave step, and one that though it may feel like it's taking a long time to make a difference, I do believe that people are doing it, but they need to feel confident about the progress that they're making. So for me, it's just about feeling confident about being able to take educated risks and seeing through some form of delivery off the back of that risk. Because whilst we need to have a level of accepted failure, we also need to achieve some pretty good stuff to demonstrate why this is going to work. And at the moment, I'm not sure that we're necessarily seeing the output.
Okay. And how could EVCOM members and agencies help you in that?
I think for me, as a commissioner of work, I rely heavily on the agencies that we have on our roster to be an extension of the team, to be a trusted partner, to understand the needs of the business and to understand at what point we're able to go outside of that expected brief. So again, when we were talking this morning about going above and beyond, absolutely, those opportunities to, because you have an understanding, because you have a relationship, because I know you deliver, because you're on my roster and this is what you do, I'm more likely to be open to the idea of trying something new, or I'm more open to the idea of taking that idea to probably a more senior stakeholder who is actually the decision maker. And that's another thing that I felt this morning when you guys were talking about it, was quite often there's an expectation that the person that you're talking to is the decision maker or the budget holder, and actually that's very seldomly going to be the case. And therefore, what we're, as the commissioners, you are facilitating that conversation. You're not necessarily making that decision. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, I think it's a good answer. And are there, when you're looking at particular projects, are there things that signify for you whether you can be more experimental in it or not?
Most definitely. There are definitely, I think I would describe it as there are churn events. There's stuff that's just happening all the time, and it's stuff that has to happen. It's hygiene, it has to be done well, it has to be done quickly, it has to be done cheaply. Churn. There are then opportunities where there is bigger ticket activity, where there's more thinking, more strategy, more thought going into what's the impact on the delegate. Not that there shouldn't be thought going into the churn activity, but you can appreciate that there's just a lot of stuff happening. And a lot of the time, the agencies that are the most successful are the ones that are keen to understand where those opportunities lie and come offering solutions to problems that you didn't necessarily know that you were trying to address.
Right. So, and are those opportunities the ones that are more mission critical to the business, effectively? Yeah. Right. And is that the same as you've experienced, Mark, in terms of the examples you gave us this morning?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because what's driving a lot of this technology coming in is because the old technology is just too painful. And because Microsoft are pushing SharePoint, and inevitably everybody is upgrading to, as soon as you go to 2010, 2013, it's got a social component with it. We should maybe use that. So the technology has been pushing it rather than the business need. So really what our job is now is to help clients find the use cases. And what has gone wrong in the past couple of years with some of these implementations has been that people say, we'll do a pilot, but we'll do it somewhere safe. Yeah, we'll do it in CSR. Yeah, because if it goes wrong, no one's going to notice. And the trouble is that if you do it in a pilot in a bit of the organisation where no one really cares, not that I'm saying people don't care about CSR, obviously, Unilever, companies like this massively up their agenda, but if you put it into a fairly small part of the organisation, nobody cares, it's not measured properly, and therefore it fizzles out. So if you're going to do a pilot, do it in sales. Do it somewhere that's strategically important to the business, because they measure it every hour, every day, and you'll know if you're doing right or if you're doing wrong. So pilots are a double-edged sword.
I think that's incredibly good advice. Richard, what's your thought on how agencies should be changing to meet clients' needs better in an utterly different world?
Yeah, I mean, I can come at this with a number of different hats on. With my Emma hat on now, I have talked to our membership, which of course are corporate event planners, so I get where they're coming from. With my previous hat on as founder and CEO of First Protocol, I know it from your side of the table, from the agency point of view. And I think it's a challenge because certainly, the likes of Charlotte and her industry colleagues are kind of a buffer, they're a filter to the budget holders. And as she says, very unlikely in a big organisation will you ever get to meet or face up to their budget holders, because they're very busy running the business and making money, and the event side of the component is a small component of their overall roles and responsibilities. So it's very important for the likes of Charlotte to really understand their business, really understand their clients' needs and wishes, and understand that individual client and manage that brand, because I'm sure you've got a few wild and wacky people in the Nationwide, but what they have to do with the
Not
business...
many.
What they have to do with the business is different. But it's then really important for you as the agencies, and I've struggled with this in the past, I admit to it, is to understand the business, the brand, the client, and of course their clients. So whether on the B2B side or the consumer side, and really sort of work with them closely to understand that. And there's reason why perhaps your ideas are not accepted, or are then accepted. I learned a very painful lesson. Thankfully, it wasn't a very expensive lesson many years ago, where I pushed one of our clients who I had a really, really, really good relationship with, and I pushed it, and we pushed the envelope too far with this client, and we had a bit of a disaster on this program. It could have ended up with someone drowning near enough. But that's because I pushed the creative experiential envelope too far. We flew these executives in little biplanes up in the Rockies in Canada, and one lady ended up falling out of a plane because she panicked, and fortunately ended up on the deck of the thing, but could have easily have ended up in the water. And all of a sudden, then I'm facing the CEO of my client, who's going absolute apeshit.
Okay. So I guess...
We could have took my bus, you see, it would be much easier. But it would have been as experiential or as nice, but it would have been safer.
Because I was going to ask Charlotte about success measures in terms of when she's looking at projects to say what would success look like. I'm guessing success is never going to be somebody falling out of a plane by accident. So what kind of... Because the whole thing is linked, very closely linked, isn't it, in terms of what are we trying to achieve, and supporting the client to really be clear about what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I push our teams to look around outcomes. So what's different off the back of it? Is that behavioural change? Is that a specific action? Is how do we measure the outcome of somebody having that experience? Again, back to the old school way of, was the food nice and could you find the toilets and stuff? It really isn't going to tell you anything other than how logistically you've managed that event. What was the purpose of doing it, and do people understand why they were there and what they need to do differently off the back of it? And then at what point are you going back to find out whether they are doing something different? That's the basis of it for me.
And how much support do you get from agencies in terms of their understanding of that and how they help you?
A lot more than maybe you would have expected previously. That I think there's a lot more emphasis going into the measurement element and the ongoing life of campaigns or activities than ever before. So, yeah.
The logistics thing, though, because we had this discussion, and I keep going about this sort of thing that, logistics are starting to sound like, they're not important. And I have to say that they are
very important.
Very important. They should be second nature. That's why we expect they become insignificant, because you expect logistics to be perfect.
Hygiene.
You only recognise the value when they're not perfect, when something goes wrong. And I think we have to emphasise to your teams and your people the importance of seamless logistics and the importance of them being able to deliver that. And then the creative can stand out, because if you haven't got great logistics and seamless delivery, then however creative you are, it doesn't matter, because no one's caring about it.
No.
If the car wasn't there to pick up the executive at the airport and his room's not ready when he arrives at the hotel, he's going to be stinking.
But I think it was Pauline this morning that was kind of saying, do you know what, that's the day job. That's the kind of, that's the...
second
that's,
nature.
That's what's the expectation is. And then the next question is, how are you going to add more value than that, really? And I don't know, Mark, if you've got other examples of where you've seen that happening inside clients.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that we assume that the sort of senior team who are presenting at these conferences, everything's in their favour, and it's not actually, because it's very hard for them to get real honest feedback about what they're presenting. And so there's a very interesting example with Grant Thornton, their partners conference last year, where they've got a social network, Drive One, and they said, well, we're going to open it up. So everything that happens at the partners conference is going to be broadcast, and people can ask questions and interact with it, and so on and so forth. Not everybody. It was, the next report's down extra 300 people. And so people were watching it and were putting in questions, and Paul Thomas, who runs it there, runs the network there, was putting those questions into the mix, as it were. And they weren't having much effect. There was one question about senior partners, female senior partners and work balance, which got a little bit of traction, but not much. Then in the bar, all of the senior people were then going onto their BlackBerries and onto their iPhones and seeing what people were saying on the network about it, and it went viral. And it became a huge, huge issue. So day 2, when I came back, suddenly it was on the agenda about work-life balance for partners, for female partners. And what was really interesting is that the reaction of the senior people were saying, we were so surprised that people out there were interested in what we were talking about and what they're interested in. So what's happening is, and this is why meetings are just so important, is that they become centres where these issues can truly be debated. But if you use social, then obviously it amplifies it, because you can get the views of the people you're talking about.
Well, part of the success, I mean, major success for Yammer is that it created, social media within the organisation. I don't know if you guys use that, but it's taken off so much. Well, Microsoft bought it.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a social piece of network which allowed major corporate organisations to talk in that medium and talk to their business and their colleagues and their employees, but in that social media platform, but in an enclosed environment, instead of it being out there in the public domain.
That kind of comes back to that kind of control freak change, really, whereby that was an issue that people wanted to talk about, that they felt was important, and so therefore they drove the conversation around what they felt was important, whereas that might have not been the conversation that those organising it from the beginning wanted necessarily to focus on. How does that...
Even if that was positioned with those people from the outset, it may not have been something that they would be prepared to consider until they were experiencing and seeing the kind of reaction that they were getting.
And the arguments,
But that sort of activity opens up to what Pauline was talking right at the beginning about, engaging the whole workforce, engaging the whole people instead of just the executive teams. And again, I think when we come down to agencies then as well, is how they engage their employees, how they train, how they develop, how they listen. The idea of having stuff, open and creative sessions on accounts, and creative sessions with everybody, or certain people within that team working, and recognising them and praising them is really important for those individuals. I think again a lot of it, agency work is very historic. It's a couple of people or even one person making decisions, and then everybody else, can you do this, and it's the dictatorial leadership which is pushing from behind, instead of the leadership which is lead by example.
You will cut down the development time of any pitch, of planning for any event, by at least a half, by working out loud, by using these tools, collaborative tools, rather than relying on email. At least a half.
And that was
first time you do it.
Yeah, that was something else that came out again in the CTN session, where they were talking about having not going away and doing something and coming back and presenting it, but it being an ongoing process, so that you and the client together were involved in that. Not that they had to be spending hours in it or shut in a room, but for that to be a continual process. And obviously you can use all sorts of different platforms and technology to enable that to be easy.
If it saves you half of one of Kevin's BMWs that he was throwing off the top of George P. Johnson or wherever it was, I mean, it doesn't take long to pay for a network. I mean, Yammer is still free for the moment. It's a limited. It won't be free for much longer. But for small companies, absolutely invest. Just Office 365 in the cloud, comes with Yammer inside it. You pay £9 a month per person. You'll be buying BMWs soon. Throwing them off buildings.
And from a client point of view, does that sound realistic? The idea of having that more open approach to developing solutions for some projects?
It sounds It sounds possible. I'm not sure necessarily
I'm
it sounds
sceptical.
immediate. At Nationwide, we are currently going through quite a significant intranet transformation program. I won't bore you with the details, but it's taking 2.5 years, and I'm hoping that in April we will be finishing that first part of the project. That's about cleaning the content and migrating to a new platform, which is coincidentally SharePoint 13. All that's going to do is meet the hygiene standard that you would expect of a business of our size. It isn't going to change the world from a collaboration perspective, because we're not quite in a position to define exactly what we want it to do. That piece of work will be starting now. So giving people the tools to do it doesn't necessarily mean if you build it, they won't necessarily come. You need to give them a reason to come, and you need to help them and enable them and give them permission, as it were, to use these tools. And actually for a long time, I'm sure in lots of companies, people haven't had that permission. You know, particularly in call centre environments, you can't take a phone into a call centre environment. You can't sit with a tablet on your desk. You can't do that stuff. Well, actually, what we're talking about now is a very different culture, a very different environment, and people need a bit of time and opportunity to understand what that means for them. And I think it's definitely coming, and people are ready, but everybody needs to be going in the same direction, as opposed to just a couple of people who were there before everybody else.
I think that comes down to understanding the clients as well, because it's interesting, because like 95%, I would guess, estimate, it's probably even higher, of financial services sector, you know, the firewalls are phenomenally tight for sensible reasons. I'm sure we'd all appreciate that. No one hopefully can get in and steal our money. But you can't give these guys a memory stick. They're not allowed to stick it into their computer. You know, they can't visit the intranet for certain things, or the internet. Can you go into LinkedIn?
You have to have special permission.
Okay, so you know, one of our clients, my old hat on, they own 65% of LinkedIn. They didn't use LinkedIn. All right, so things you might think is that, okay, well, we could have LinkedIn linked to the conference so that, you know, our delegates can contact and network with each other. No, they can't do that. So you have to understand that industry sector.
It comes back to that insight of an individual kind of client and really listening to what that client thinks is possible. Hopefully it means that you could have some dialogue about it, but if those are your circumstances, there is no point on earth in trying to
push product or service,
push against it.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's always the conversations around the art of the possible are genuinely exciting for people who want to be progressive, and I think most people who work in our industry want to be progressive. They want to be doing the next most exciting, most engaging, most impactful thing, and bringing those things to light and helping maybe companies who are slightly less forward thinking to find ways to reach those same outcomes, I think is definitely a conversation that I'm very open to.
And what's your best way of doing that? Is that coming to events like this? How do you do that?
With the companies that are currently on our roster, we have quite frequent feedback and conversations around things that are coming up. We have quite open pitch conversations around who and how people will be invited to pitch for work. The teams, my team look after the roster and do specific work. The rest of the business, there's lots and lots of activity that's going on throughout the business, but they're all going through the same roster. So my team are there as a support mechanism for the agencies, so they can check in with the team about sense checking their approach to the pitch, maybe running through their pitch before they pass it on to deliver it to the actual client area. So those kind of things are standard practice for us. As far as being new and innovative, it's just about opportunity, really.
So those potentially agencies having a good understanding of you and knowing when to say, we think this would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Can I throw it open to the floor now then and ask, in the context of talking about collaboration and what it means in terms of helping clients deliver work that's really useful to them and helping agencies develop appropriately. What are the key questions, the burning issues that have come up for you so far today? Elling.
I think as a profession we should just take this challenge and realize that for us to help clients derive the full benefits of events, we've got to become management consultants. First, we have to understand the client, and maybe we're in a position which is better than other consultants because we can illustrate with the client how, for example, a different management culture and philosophy which is based on participation and openness can become more effective in terms of getting staff to deliver more value for their pay packet. Because we can't run a collaborative event with openness and discussion and everybody's seen and respected if the CEO gets on stage and expects everybody to do exactly what he tells him. And we have that sort of hook into management philosophy and style and culture, and why shouldn't we measure up to actually do that? I think if you particularly if you do internal events, I think, you've got to see yourself as a management consultant as well in order to deliver that internal event value to its fullest.
Mark, what's your
I
response
think
to that?
that's a key point. And the question is, if not us, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, Accenture ain't going to do it, KPMG ain't going to do it, PwC. What we have as a skill base, okay, we come from the craft. Those of my generation, we started making, television or whatever. We come from a craft base. But what we've done over the years is we're very good at putting teams together very quickly and making something work and making something happen and moving things forward. Now, the killer app in social is communities. Yeah? This is where you put it in, nothing happens. It's because they haven't done the community thing, right? It's the groups. You make groups that don't follow the hierarchy of the company. Yeah, they follow what people actually do for a living and what their interests are and so on and so forth. Galvanizing and getting those groups together is just like, do you remember when you were doing a conference, maybe for a company that, throw your mind back 10 years that hadn't done a conference before, and you've got 6 speakers or 8 speakers, and you have to turn this into something which is coherent, and you've got to do it in 2 weeks, and you've got half a day rehearsal. We have the skills to champion that spirit of working together and aligning ourselves around one particular thing. I've spent a lot of time in this space. I have not found any other consultancy, OD, any of that can do this. The only people who can do this are communicators, and we need to step up to the plate and let go of the shackles of, it doesn't. I mean, what we have to understand is that SharePoint, if you try and design SharePoint, if you try and make SharePoint look pretty, you will be costing your client a fortune because they'll have to scale that in South America and it won't work. So you have to put up with the tools. Yammer looks like Yammer looks like Yammer for the moment. Yeah, so our craft skills of making things pretty are going to have to be put on the back burner for a while. And what we should be using is our skills to galvanize teams and to get people moving towards a particular direction very quickly.
Fantastic. And any other questions? Any other thoughts that you guys have had from the day so far in terms of the challenges? Yes, Chris.
Chris Davidson, Active Presence. Just strikes me, Angela, that your panel might be in a good position to offer some advice to agencies, should they wish to take it, which is, what is it that agencies should do? What advice would you like to give agencies on the changes that you think they ought to make to be more useful? I'm just by way of backdrop, I'm thinking of a client of mine who isn't an agency, not in this industry at all, but every big project this client comes up with, they have an external consultant review the project, and the brief of that external consultant is, are we being ambitious enough? Discuss.
Richard, what were you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an association, as business, as individuals, businesses, you shouldn't try and boil the ocean. You should try and choose 3, I like the number 3, it's simple, but 3 things you want to do. 3 key objectives and then build your strategies around those 3 key objectives. One of the things that I think frustrates me, or I've seen it and I've been in it, and I understand it, I think a lot of what you guys are thinking about probably is very short-termism. Because it's, of course, you know, are we going to hit our budgets this month? Are we going to hit our P&L for the end of the year? Are we going to make money, or am I hemorrhaging money? Are we going to go bust and everything else? And it's really, really difficult for you to think longer term. And I think part of what, as an association and industry practice, that's what the association EventCom should be doing, is looking longer term for the industry and the strategy. I love what's come out of this session today, and I know it's been going around and around and around, but the whole thing around education and the professionalization of this industry, I would like to see ongoing credits and merits and development for people to get professional marks and stuff like that, and initials by their names or whatever, not for the sake of having it, but for the sake of us all knowing this person's at this grade, this person's at this grade, this person's has these capabilities. You have to take ownership of the education element of this industry. These universities out there, I put my hand up as a visiting fellow for Sheffield, but there's some brilliant people out there, but we all knock it. We all knock the education system. It seems to be the easy thing to do. Those guys are working as hard as they can to do it, but if you can get involved with them more and become, visiting lecturers, and it's just going and telling your story or working more integrated with it, all of a sudden we're going to have good people coming through the pipeline. But what you want might be 3-5 years down the road, but that has to be the long-termism, not the short-termism.
I would completely agree with that. Going around agencies, I do get sometimes quite sad that they are so focused on the short term, so focused on what their needs are rather than potentially why they're doing what they're doing and what they have to offer clients in the future. And sometimes if I talk about trends and what other people are doing, there is a response that's like, well, we're not thinking about this because we've just done this. And when you look at the work, I'm afraid some of it looks like work I could have seen 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And you just think this doesn't feel like the world they inhabit when they're not in the office. When they get into the office, they deliver something for clients, which isn't the world they live in when they're at home. And I find that a bit baffling. And I agree with you, Richard, that the more we can be in touch with what a wider community and younger community, it's not just a generational thing, obviously, but people coming up who have an utterly different worldview, then that's going to drive the development in order to meet the needs of clients in the future, which are not remotely what they are today or yesterday. What else from your point of view, Charlotte, in terms of what, to answer Chris's question?
I'm going to sound slightly boring now, but it is about honesty, really. It's about having honest conversations about what, as an agency, you can offer, what you can offer as a level of hygiene and delivery excellence, and what else. What else do you want to be delivering, and how will you deliver it without having an adverse effect on that excellence that you've already been supplying us with? Because I'm not of an opinion that we can allow anything to slip, and therefore if there's a different kind of relationship that an agency wants to have based on more strategic input or more creative innovation, then there's no reason why that can't take place as long as everything that was in place continues to be ticking over.
Charles, there's an interesting, because again that came out this morning, and you're talking about the honesty, and I like that, is that people are asking, well, why don't some of the lead agencies take us to the pitch? And I think there's probably sometimes a fear from the lead agency, no, we have to be seen to be able to do everything. So these are our ideas, these concepts. But I disagree with that. I agree with what some people were asking earlier. Because if, say, a lead agency, one of your rostered agency, brought a supplier to the table at the pitch, you wouldn't be going directly to that supplier because he's not on your roster. And so you can't do that anyway. So they've got to go through that channel. But all of a sudden you see that here is this agency bringing the best in breed to the table.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach. For me, that demonstrates the fact that they are seeking out expertise that will deliver the absolute best outcome for
Yeah.
you.
And that's in that sense, that's a massive strength rather than, I think,
Transparency,
again,
Yeah.
yeah,
openness.
absolutely. Rather than the control freakery, which says we know all the answers and we're going to try and keep it within us.
And going back to like the point that I just made rather badly, was in times of strain when projects are in mid-flow and they're at their most critical stage, that relationship works both ways. So from a client's perspective, personally, having worked both sides of the fence to some degree, I understand the process that you're going through. I understand the strain that is being felt and the resource pull that's being felt there. So on one hand, that delivery is all the more commendable, but when you get to the other side, you can't then say, oh, and by the way, we can do X, Y, Z and put a cherry on the top, when you know the degree of pain that has just been experienced to deliver whatever it was that you just done. I didn't explain that very well, so I'm going to stop.
Any other questions from today so far? From Steve?
Thanks. Can I just raise the question of scale, that is, the scale of agencies and suppliers and partners within the industry? I don't know what the panel's view on this is, and it hasn't been discussed in any of the sessions that I've been in today, but if we're talking about things like the process of evaluation and measurement, if we're talking about things like professional training and development, if we're talking about being able to integrate many other services, including partners, into the offering, I do wonder whether the structure of the industry at the moment, with a very large number of relatively small players, is best equipped to be able to do that. And maybe the reason that, I think you were saying earlier, Mark, that we are communicators, we're in a very good position, but do we really exploit that in terms of turning into something as on a bigger scale as, say, the advertising agency? And I do wonder if part of that is because so many ECOM members are generally living from month to month and don't take that long-term view. And I suspect that if there were a small number of bigger players, would that help to solve the problem?
Fascinatingly enough, that comes down absolutely to the subject of collaboration.
Yeah.
And when I work with different types of agencies, we could see that some of them working together could be incredibly useful to clients and incredibly powerful. But I know that's not going to happen. They won't consider doing that because they feel as though, again, they want to have control in one way or another, and they don't feel as though they can work collaboratively. And there tends to be, excuse me, friends, a bit of bitchiness about other people's work. You know, oddly enough, the agencies say, oh yeah, they're terrible. You know, or else they say, actually, people work with us because we're nicer. It's like, well, hello, you're all very nice, you wouldn't get any work. So I completely agree with you that there could be incredible strengths by putting people together and delivering really exciting as well as hygienic things for clients, and maybe thinking about it more collaboratively would be a really good idea to be able to do better work and have better results. And I think Marco's standing here in order to tell me to tell us to wind up. Yes.
I mean, with my old First Protocol hat on, I very much with developing our business strategy, I collaborated with a number of my key clients and would even share with them, meet with them and talk about, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking the business going next, where do you want? And certainly with our expansion, both into the US and into Asia, it was on the back of our clients saying, we'd love to get you doing business in the US, but you're not there. So we're not going to fly you over there to do it. It happens occasionally. But you know, if you're there, there's a potential, there's never a guarantee that we'll give you business there. And the same with Asia. You know, as we were developing our business and looking at the clients that we were working with, there was definitely the big financial institutions that we were working with. They basically wanted to work with one agency in a number of major destinations. So they wanted to slim down their roster, shall we say, and have people that they were only looking at agencies who could facilitate stuff in multiple destinations. So again, it depends on the size of the work you're going after.
So listening and being able to work
And
collaboratively,
working
listening
with
to that
it,
client and
but being
working
open with
collaboratively.
them,
Yeah,
but also,
absolutely.
like Charlotte's saying there, being open and you've got to be at that level of trust both ways to have that discussion of saying, okay, well, look, this is, on my next phase, would you mind if I share this? I mean, it's a great sales technique, trust me, it works. I'd love to meet with you and bounce a few ideas. I'm thinking about where I'm taking my business next. Have you got some time? Oh, they'd love that. But you know, and it works. But it also gives you great feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No,
Thanks to the panel. There were three, I think, key points that I brought out from this session, which is really insightful, which is around the professionalisation and standing of our sector, our industry, and you as professionals. The sort of honesty and integrity in the work that you're doing, the way in which you communicate and engage. And then also the role of supporting client to navigate their way through innovation and technology and what that means. I think it's really valuable. And all of it speaks broadly to the theme of today, which is around collaboration. So thank you so much. Thanks to Mark, Charlotte, Richard, and of course to Angela for this afternoon's session. Thank you.